Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me to RUPRI's Cultural Wealth Conference. My name is Heike Meyer, and I'm a professor of economic geography at the Institute of Geography at the University of Bern. I will be talking about something very interesting. I will be talking about entrepreneurs and innovators who live and work in very remote peripheral regions in the European Alps. It's a fascinating topic because oftentimes in innovation studies, in economic development studies, we assume that innovation takes place only in cities. This is actually a fact that has often been stated by very prominent researchers, such as Richard Florida. Here in this quote, he ultimately says that the city is the eternally conducive environment for generating human creativity, which underpins innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic growth. So what we see here is a very pronounced urban bias that has been sort of pervading a lot of our studies that focus on the question why and how do regions develop and grow economically. And when we look at innovation, we see sort of a dilemma between two perspectives. So the one perspective on the left is the perspective of the urban bias. It's the perspective that innovation only takes place in cities and that innovation flourishes in sort of these dense environments where you have lots of people working on great creative ideas. I explicitly chose this picture because it also shows a bit of a bias towards very homogeneous groups, clusters of similar industries in big cities. On the other hand, we have a notion of innovation, and this is an emerging one in the literature, where we find evidence that innovation can also take place outside of the big cities. It can take place in rural places, in peripheral places, but it might actually function in a very different way as compared to innovation in big cities. It might be more slow in terms of getting to the market. It might be more introverted in terms of tinkering and trying out and experimenting. It might be even more strategic when you think about entrepreneurs and innovators in peripheral regions. They have to go out and really look for sources of ideas. So there's a sort of a different approach to studying innovation in rural areas. And this is actually my argument. I argue that in peripheral regions we have slow innovation that is very different from what might take place in cities. I conducted interviews in 3 different regions in the Alps. I will present evidence from 2 regions. So I went to Italy, to the western part in the north of Italy, to Valmaira and Valle Po. I went to also Austria, a region called East Tyrol, Osttyrol, and I'm also conducting interviews in Switzerland. But I will focus on Osttyrol and Valmaira. This is a study that was funded by the Regional Studies Association, and I spent large parts of my sabbatical in 2019 doing this kind of field work. First, I would like to take you to Valmaira and Valle Po in Italy. This is a picture of this region in Valmaira. Valle Po is a bit north of Valmaira, but these regions are very remote. You have about 45-60 minutes from the largest town at the beginning of the valley to the very small village at the end of the valley. The region has also experienced significant outmigration starting in the 50s, 60s. Now you have a mix of locals, very few locals, some entrepreneurs who are moving there, and a lot of people who have secondary homes, partly because of their family had lived there, but their parents or grandparents had moved out of the valley to find work in the larger cities. The region now has set a lot of its fortune, of its economic development efforts into sort of sustainable tourism. There are hiking trails where you can stop in the little villages and stay at these huts and hotels that they established. There's a small community of farmers who are selling artisanal products. Also, you have newcomers, so-called new Highlanders. This could be refugees who found a place to live and work in these valleys, but also young entrepreneurs like the picture on the lower right hand. These are two young entrepreneurs from Genoa who just opened a bakery in the valley of Valle Po. The other region is Osttirol in Austria. It's a bit of a different region, a little bit more accessible. You have a larger city. The valleys are not as narrow, not as depopulated. You also find quite a few small, medium-sized enterprises, like on the picture here, which is a manufacturer of window shadings. Yeah, in this region you find a lot of sort of crafts-based industrial firms, but also some fashion firm. You find some crafts manufacturer of essential oils, and you find even high-tech firms. So I was interested in the question, how does slow innovation work in these regions? One aspect of slow innovation is this idea that innovation has to happen very rapidly. There has to be a high frequency of getting inputs, developing ideas, and getting these ideas to the market. So I call this the dimension 1. It's time to market. In the peripheral regions, what I found was there's a high reliance on technical, scientific, and traditional knowledge. There's no evidence for relying on knowledge that is essential for, quick action on the market. So these entrepreneurs, they actually have really good skills. They often develop their own skills on their own. They find solutions on their own, and they often rely on traditional knowledge. There's also a very high level of strategically searching for knowledge. So, for example, the one person I picture here, he's a brush maker, and he told me that, well, if he has a problem with his machine, well, he looks on the internet, he finds some solutions, and he tinkers and develops the solution to it. They also reported that they have a very low frequency of interactions, so interactions with partners, with customers. They're very strategic. One high-tech entrepreneur told me, well, I go once a year to this trade fair. This is sufficient to me. We develop our products, and only at the very last moment we need to interact with the customer in person. A lot of these entrepreneurs, they tell me that they rely heavily on internal capacities and simple solutions to problems that they find. And they are characterized by incremental and process innovation. And the last thing that was really interesting to me was there was a very high level of cultural diversity and a lot of ability to cross sort of boundaries in the community. So for example, the one picture I show you here, where you see the pipes and the barrels, it's actually an essential oil manufacturer. And the pipes, they illustrate heavy investments they made into automating their essential oil manufacturing. And he only was able to do that because he connected with this high-tech company in the town, because he knew him from the local tennis club. So they got to talk about the problem of the oil maker that he needed to automate and that he needed to find an automation company. And the high-tech entrepreneur said, well, we could develop a solution for you. I think he would not have found this solution so quickly if he would have been in a cluster of essential oil makers. But because he was in the rural area, he was really interacting with a lot of different people, with diverse people. So in other work, we call that actually the diversity, and this is an advantage of more smaller communities in rural areas. So this was time to market. Here I show you a couple of quotes that illustrate maybe the experimentation, sort of this trying out. She is a cheesemaker, and she said, well, yeah, they went to school. They were in another business before, restaurant business, and then they wanted to make the cheese and become a cheesemaker. And she went to school for that. But she also had to afterwards really try a lot and experiment. And she did it with calmness, trying it again, and becoming better. So highlighting that really these entrepreneurs in the rural area, they don't, they rely heavily on their internal capacities. The same here with Serena Giraudo. She is a gardener in a very high altitude community. And she also says that she had to try out, she had to find ways, she had to really search on the internet to find out how she could do it, but then really implementing and trying it out. So I think two very interesting approaches to innovation that show you how do-it-yourself or this experimentation is an important part of innovation in peripheries. The second dimension is another interesting dimension of slow innovation. I call it the deceleration dimension. What I found in the interviews across the entrepreneurs was actually a very deep sense that they had to make meaningful work, that they had to engage in work that has meaning to them, that they also would like to contribute to their community and to be part of a larger idea, essentially. And I would argue that essentially the periphery, it affords this kind of deceleration. It affords experimentation. It affords sort of looking beyond economic growth goals and engaging with issues like the meaning of work, passion of work, and realizing projects in a community. To give you a quote here, she is a social innovation entrepreneur. She established a program for refugees to settle in the community in the Valle Po. So she says, I came here because you can realize a lot of projects if you want. You need to have ideas, methods, but you can do it. What I wanted to do maybe is to give a better reason to my life. I don't know, a meaning to realize things. So to me, this was not just the only person that said that, but in almost all the interviews, I heard this kind of idea that, yeah, there has to be meaning to my work, and I would like to give back to the community. So we also have to think about not just pure economic aspects of innovation, like how to get an idea to the market, but we also may have to think a little bit more about why do these entrepreneurs live in these peripheral places and engage with innovation. And it's because they would like to give meaning to their life. So in conclusion, slow innovation is a very promising concept for thinking about innovation in the periphery. We have to think in two dimensions. One is the pure sort of economic development dimension, that they are innovative, that their innovations are developed in different ways. They get to the market. And the other dimension, dimension two, is this idea of deceleration, and that the periphery may offer a space and afford these entrepreneurs to decelerate and engage with meaningfulness. There's clearly a deliberate choice and motivation of slow innovators to stay or to choose the periphery as a place for their innovation activities. And perhaps this leads me to think a little bit more about practice and meaning of work, especially innovative work in the periphery in this post-growth era. And we have to think about, well, maybe emptiness, maybe this idea that these regions are losing population. Maybe there's a marginality to these regions. This may actually help these entrepreneurs. It gives them space to think and to also engage with meaningfulness. Thank you very much. I hope that you will have a great conference, that you engage a lot. Unfortunately, the conference time is at the time when I go to sleep, but I wish you all the best and stay healthy. Thank you very much. Bye.